Welcome. Got a few pieces of business first. Because this is going in the Reed Archives, we'd like each of you to sign a release that allows them to use what we do here today. Oh yeah, there's lots of pens. So the kind of the general rules are, we'd like one person to speak at a time. I'll call on people. Raise your hands, please. When you start to speak, say your name and your Reed affiliation. You know, class of whatever, or I'm married to somebody from class of whatever. We would like you to kind of keep it short and sweet, if possible. If you got cell phones that are on now, if you could silence them, that'd be great. Also, please speak up, because we're taping it, and some of you who are very soft-spoken are very hard to understand on the later tape when the archivist will be transcribing it. I'm David Perry, class of 73. It's our class 50 years out that sponsored this. Quite a few years ago, I got the idea for this when I was here at a volunteer weekend, and the then Dean of Admissions said he'd had a long conversation with a lady who said Reed students aren't normal. I said to him, but Bob, she's right. Reed students aren't normal. We're way more intelligent than the average person, which means we're more analytical, less likely to accept authority without questioning it, and in general, look at the world differently than the average person. Since we don't like to take anything on faith, we're also probably, in general, less religious than the average. We also tend to be more creative than the average person. Look at Pete poet Gary Snyder, writer Barbara Ehrenreich, dropouts Ry Cooder, Steve Jobs, and Peter Norton. Who would think that someone could make a solid career out of playing novelty records on the radio? Our friend Barry Hansen, better known to the world as Dr. Demento, did just that.
This is the first reunion in a long time he hasn't come.
Closer, he's here. Closer to our years, I can think of Roger Perlmutter, my freshman roommate and the research director at two of the major drug companies in America. Keith Martin, who runs one of the most successful magazines in America in a day and age when magazines are dying like flies. And Steve Reichlin, who sold millions of barbecue books and pops up every Saturday.
And he was a French major.
On PBS. He studied French. He got a Fulbright to go to study French medieval cooking and became a barbecue king. And I could go on. Thus said, we do get jobs. We do get married. I said to him, or form long-term relationships, because gay people couldn't get married 25 years ago. We have kids, we buy houses, and we look like everybody else. But below the surface, I think we're different. So who would like to say something?
Jim Kahn, 64. When I gave the commencement address in 2005, one of the things I said is that when I came to Reed, I wasn't like everybody else, but that was okay. I didn't fit in because none of us fit in. We were all unique, and we formed a lot of different circles of gatherings, so nobody had one set group of friends. We all had different clusters of friends depending upon our interests. So I had my folk dancers and I had my psychologists, and I was the only overlap.
Well, yeah,
You are?
I am Marcia Yaros, class of 73, and I had the unexpected luck to end up working in the medical device industry, so I was working in corporate America. And when I came back to Portland for the first time, it was my 25th reunion, I realized that I had really missed Rudy's, because while the people in the corporate world I worked with were very smart, by and large, and of course this is a generalization, most of them were smart and liked to talk about business, money, and maybe sports. Whereas, you know, in academics and with Reedies, you talk about literature, and that segues into music or into theater or into politics, or into lots of different things. So, that's one of the things I've really loved about coming back and associating again with Reedy's.
Someone else have a comment?
I have a comment.
You are?
Diana Peterson, psychology, 73, and I'm just wondering if it could be that we might be different in maybe not quite so positive ways, such as being slightly on the spectrum, some of us, or ADD, or, this is something that's only recently starting to occur to me, and I've never
Used to be an
thought it was
additional
perfectly
requirement.
normal, but now that so many people are on the spectrum and it's becoming known, I also worked for Microsoft for a long time, and a lot of those people are too. And I started to think that we're different, all right, and maybe it's good, but maybe there's some parts that aren't so good.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm Paul Stern, I'm class of 73. I think that Reed, I don't believe that people that go to Reed are necessarily smarter than like everybody else. And I certainly met really smart people in the course of, after leaving Reed. And I met some smart people at Reed, but I just think Reedies are more independent. They're much less likely to agree with almost anything, and they certainly are not happy to put up with bullshit. I don't think Reed people, generally speaking, like meetings, and I'm not sure they're great listeners. When I went to Reed, it was a very cliquish place. It was a socially upside down world where the people that sort of traditionally were like least poorly adjusted to the so-called real world were like outstanding at Reed, and the normal people really suffered, didn't know how to fit in. There were no real rules for fitting in, but I think unfortunately it was a very cliquish place because it was such a challenging social environment. But I loved it, and I think I loved Reedy's, but I think what's unusual about Reedy's is just a real sense of, independence and, intellectual curiosity and that sort of thing, so.
I think you had your hand up first.
Oh, okay. Annette Gardner, class of 83. So from my perspective and my time, which would have been 1978, I think I floated in normal, but I popped out less so. And I'm kind of a structure agency person who believes it's about the context that really then turned around and shaped my behavior. And I like to say my cliques actually have been friends for life. So I'm very grateful for that. And it helped with, transforming you into much more of a critical thinker and taking that out into the rest of the world. So I don't know that we all come in normal or unnormal, but that we have to give a lot of emphasis to how the institution sort of shapes us as we go through it.
Well, I guess there's the question as to, does Reed change us, or do we come in the way we go out? That's a question to throw out.
Something that Paul said relates to, Karen Greenbaum, Maya, class of 73, former German lit major. I think one thing that distinguishes Reedy's from a lot of other people is that we are insufferably curious. And it's the intellectual's kind of curiosity. It's not to be obnoxious, though that may come with the territory. It's that we really don't care as long as we can find out why and what. And we're willing to put the energy into finding out. The thing I loved, one of the many things I loved about Reed being here was that besides finally not getting flagged for doing what was interesting to me, there were so many people who did things for the love of it. Quite no grades, no money, just I care passionately about this, and I'm going to put time into it and go where I go. The willingness to work to satisfy your curiosity. I don't know, I doubt it's unique here, but I sure encountered a lot more here than any other place.
Yes.
Salam, class of '93. To pick up on that, I think that love of learning continues after graduation in such activities as activism and advocacy, and it's things you can't monetize, you know, that you can't put a price on, and I think I really like how Reedy's push back on, you know, sort of utilitarianism and doing what's only pragmatic. And so as much as I admire the folks who have, Reedy's who have achieved things in what we call conventional manner, I also appreciate those who have sort of, you know, beaten their own path and just done things, you know, in a different way just because they were interested in something and one thing led to another and all of a sudden they found their calling, if you will.
Does that apply to you, Salam? What have you done that?
Oh, I was just greeting everyone with peace. My name's actually Vijay. Yes,
DJ
to some
in class
extent.
of? DJ in class of?
93.
Thank you.
Yes, to some extent. I got into like the global justice movement and the war against Iraq, and I was like racially profiled during the DNC in 2004 by the Secret Service. Yes, the people who take a bullet for the president. So as you can imagine, it was quite an ordeal and very disturbing to my family. But I banded together with some friends, got a lot of encouragement from you all Reedies, and I actually filed a lawsuit against the Secret Service in federal court.
Yes, you did.
Happy to talk about it later, but the gist of it is, I don't know if I would have done all those things if I didn't go to school here and imbibe and absorb from all of you, you know, all the unconventional ways that we do things.
Yes?
Looks like Ian, class of 03 site. I'm going to answer both of your questions. So I came here a Southern Baptist from Texas. Yeah. Just like the movie, which was really strange. And, you know, I came here because it was an institution for weirdo eggheads, as has been explained to me. And I'd gotten this flyer in the mail that's like, the question, or the answers constantly change. You need to know how to ask the questions. And I actually still have that up on my wall, and now that I'm an educator, that's what sort of I teach, is that the answers are going to constantly change. So I would say that when I got here, I was already that sort of person who wanted to have that endless curiosity. But I think what Reed instilled in me is to take a look at the status quo, and instead of just asking the common questions, you take a step back and ask, yeah, but why do I believe this thing? Why do I believe this thing? Why do I believe that? I think that's definitely a thing that changed when I got to Reed, especially given my upbringing, but like, it's something that's really stayed with me since I left, is that propensity to not only ask why, but then to make sure that everyone else is asking why as well, to sort of like pass on that curiosity.
I'll build on both of their answers because like I have found.
Your name?
Oh, correct. My name is Kellen. I ended up being spring fall 2006 2007 philosophy department, also pre-med, and basically one of my biggest challenges is that read values don't translate into business, in part because money prevents you from following the information wherever it goes. And so I find that substantive reasoning is actually a trait that is highly selected against. There's actually research that suggests that 80% of gifted adults, not Reed specific, but you know, we're definitely in this category, are underemployed or unemployed as adults. There was a psychologist that followed gifted children for 40 years. And he was like, these are going to be the leaders of industry. And at the end of the study, that's absolutely not. That the system filters out substantive reasoning, in part because it's threatening. Because if you decide that your profit isn't ethically sourced, or if there's something wrong with your reasoning or the science, then it's like Reedy's will always stand up for the substantive thing. And I feel I've had a lot of difficulty because I threaten people with this approach. And, have found it actually very difficult to make money because I also have disagreements with how money works, so.
Me too. Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, where I'm just like, why, and also why can't I be a whole person and like be weird and not fit the norms, but like also if I have skills, still give you those skills without following a bunch of social norms that I can't seem to understand? Then it's like, why? So I'm probably also neurodivergent, and neurodivergent people are also selected against. So only 15% of people diagnosed with autism are employed because the filter is a filter for neurotypical social presentation. And I'm like, why are we filtering people for access to resources based on the way that their brain processes information? Why aren't you doing it for the skill? Anyways, I'll stop taking up time, but.
Laura?
I love you for saying that. And
Aw, thank you.
several people in the room have said the same thing and said, yes, that's absolutely right. We're a little self-congratulatory in here, but the fact of the matter is that there is the downside. And if I had one wish, actually, for Reed, I would offer a course in how to be a cunning bastard in the real world.
Oh, I'll teach you.
Jonathan Gilbert, class of 03.
But if you wish to, you might be able to.
Just,
Laura?
sorry. I was just mirroring what you said, because this class of how to be a bastard in the real world, as you put it, there's actually a book called The 48 Laws of Power, which, if you haven't heard of it, it's pretty much like how to be a Sith in the real world. And I had never heard of this thing. I think Reed is almost like coming from a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where we don't have this political, it's there under the covers, but it's not something that we're overtly indoctrinating people into. We're indoctrinating people into how to be critical thinkers, into how to be contributors to society. And if you get into a corporate environment which is highly political and disagreeing with the wrong person can very well lose your job, then maybe that class, just sort of a know your enemy kind of thing, or how to participate in that, wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yes.
Sharon Toji, class of 1958. Excuse me. Shout out to the one other person that I know for sure is here from my class. It's hard to begin, but and try not to go on too long. But one major thing, of course, and I think other people have mentioned it, although I'm having a very difficult time hearing without hearing aids, is that this love of learning and finding out for its own sake. And it has served me well my whole life, led me into tons of interesting careers and ways that I could change my life quickly when circumstances warranted it. Another thing I have to mention is I don't know how many people ever studied under John Pock. I remember how, when John first came, everybody said, wow, this guy is coming from the University of Chicago and he is, etc. So I took I majored in medieval German literature, and I took sociology from John. And one day he said something that has served me my whole life and actually led pretty much to my current career. I'm a national expert in disability communication and wayfinding. And he said, if you had a fender bender in the middle of an intersection, and there were 4 intersections and crowds of people at each one, and the police came and said to each one, now tell me what happened. He said everybody would say something different, and they would all be telling the truth. And that was one of the most important things, I think, that really I learned and took away from Reed, and has been so wonderful. The last thing is, I didn't realize the sexism that went on at Reed. It did go on, I'm realizing that now. But luckily, I'd been brought up by a father and mother who didn't recognize it. I just always thought I could do whatever I set out to do. And when I was at Reed, I did the same thing. I became the acting U.S. documents librarian when I was a senior at Reed, of all things, because the documents librarian had to leave and they couldn't find a replacement. She said, oh, Sharon can do it. So I did it, you know, and that led to jobs too. But the thing is, I gained, for the first, I don't know how many weeks, I never said anything in humanities. I was so afraid I would say something stupid, you know. And finally I said something and everybody said, yeah, oh, wow, that's right. And it gave me courage to go out in the world in all kinds of places with all kinds of people, little Echo, Oregon, population 400, and I went out with bravery because of Reed, that I could say things that were intelligent. So thank you, Reed.
Yes.
Lindy Robinson, class of '73, and I came into Reed from a, you know, sort of a leftist family. I mean, my father and were demonstrated in the marches in '68 down in the South, and I didn't feel any kind of compunction about not talking here. But what I did recognize was how smart the people were around me, and how listening to people who are smart is a real gift. You don't need to be talking all the time. You need to be listening. And also a very, very strong feeling, because of that period of time, of justice. And so I ended up going into law, working at the Department of Justice. But when I retired early, my life has really been devoted to doing all sorts of social justice kinds of things. I started running medical. I couldn't dissect something in a biology class. I've been running medical teams in Guatemala for 20 years. I have, been able to triage people and understand the medical problems that they have. I've gotten to watch medical professionals work, watch my husband work, watch my son work, and now I'm working with refugees who've come from Afghanistan, and I'm using my legal training to be able to help them navigate the immigration system. And that has become my passion, and that came out of not only my family background, which really came from my father rather than from my mother, but I think from just sort of the intellectual ferment I saw here, and the people who were sort of oddballs and did things. I mean, we can all remember what happened when the FBI came to Reed College, and they were greeted by the band on Circle and given a birthday cake that they thought was going to be poisoning them. And they didn't know what to do as to whether to eat it or not. And so that's what this place has given me.
Laura?
Well, since this is being recorded, I want to amend what I said earlier.
Oh, who are you?
Thank you, my dear husband. Laura Levin, class of 1973. Keep the cunning and forget the bastard, because our values, I think, collectively are pretty damn wonderful. But what we really could use some work on is speaking truth to power effectively, if you know what I mean. And I've had to do that in many ways over the past 40 years, first with the AIDS research, and then in philanthropy, evaluating their strategies. And sometimes you have to say the emperor doesn't have any clothes on, and how do you do that in such a way that you don't get fired, right? It is clearly an art. I am clearly a remedial case for people skills, and to this day willing to learn because I'm baffled.
Jim Kahn.
Jim Kahn again. I've got a question. How many people here have deliberately spoken truth to power and paid the consequences.
Yep.
For the recording, what percentage of the,
Most of us.
What about the other way?
Do you want to keep your hands up for a second?
Benefactor.
Keep your hand.
Keep your hands up for, I'll record it if that's okay with everyone.
Depends on who the power is.
Depends on how you do it.
I didn't follow the question.
Effectively speaking truth
Oh,
to
it's
power.
effectively.
Basically, who among us has effectively spoken truth to power and then paid the price
Paid the
for it?
consequences for it.
And this time
And-
benefited.
Well, wait, if it's-
And worked out.
Yeah.
Can someone?
at a different job?
Yeah, at a different job.
At a different job, yeah.
Different job, yes.
Wait, what?
After
Many
the
fewer.
fight happened.
Okay.
Earlier in this.
Quick housekeeping matter. A lot of people have walked in since the waiver form was sent around. How many people have not signed it? Raise your hand. Pass this around, please. Trying to get everybody to sign it.
What are we waiving?
Well, you're allowing Reed College to use the conversation in their archives, basically. There's a written form that says what you're signing away. So, yes.
This is being
No, I'm,
recorded.
I'm,
Oh, you're
I've
waiting
signed
for,
it.
okay.
Um,
Do we have another comment from
I have one, two, was it, I'm sorry, Lauren? Laura?
Laura?
Laura.
Laura. One of the things that I did not learn at Reed, which maybe another class to teach, was humility. That came later, thankfully. And after learning that, so we're smart people. It's okay to acknowledge that we are smart people, patting ourselves on the back, etc. I think for me, one of the toughest things to do was to allow other people to look smarter than I was, and sometimes they very much are. And so one of the ways that I have learned, getting to the second question, to speak truth to power and get away with it, benefit from it, is to give your ideas to other people, let them foment it, let it grow, and then they have the idea. So you have benefited them, you've benefited the whole organization, and you just have to be humble about it and be like, that's fine that I'm not getting credit for it. And I think that was really difficult for me to practice.
Can I tell you what that is? Henry Truman. You get a lot done in life, you don't care who gets credit.
Sure.
Truman.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You are?
These are rare ideas. Brian McGreen, class of 91.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Mark?
Yeah, I was gonna do a friendly amendment to both what Jose and Laura had said, which is the skill is not only learning to tell truth to power and be effective at it, but also learning how to identify where you're at, where you're going to be able to be effective. There are folks that are never gonna listen, but after I got fired from the job where I suffered the consequences, I also learned some so-called emotional intelligence skills. But as you know, that I had sorely lacked. Learned that trick about getting things done by letting other people get credit, but also how to be more selective in where I devoted my energies. So,
Yes.
Okay, I'm John Ullman, class of 65, and I agree all Reedies are smart, but some Reedies are smarter than others. And I met my life partner, who's hiding back there, Irene Namikong, I think 3 minutes after I walked on campus in 1961. And her IQ is a full sigma, more than mine. And, so that we got involved in the Cultural Affairs Board here. And that really informed our lives a lot more than our academic studies, which did teach us how to think and question and all of that good stuff. Irene graduated in chemistry, I did in biology, I did in chemistry. And we ended up having a business that found work for roots musicians, they'd say today, or folk musicians. And our first client was a woman named Elizabeth Cotton, who wrote the song Freight Train. And we started working with her when she was 82 years old. Now there's a business plan for you, right? And 10 years later, she'd won a Grammy Award, and last year she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which probably would have confused her, but at any rate. And she was a housekeeper all her adult life until she started making money with music in her 60s. And she had no formal, very little formal education beyond a few years of grade school. So education doesn't equal being smart or being competent.
No. Or successful.
So that's, and the last thing I want to say is that in our trajectory, I don't want to recite them all now, but maybe 15, 20 people at Reed, our students and fellow students and faculty, informed us one way or another, starting, say, with Barry Hansen, who lent us the first authentic folk music records we ever listened to, and going on from there, Phil and Vivian Williams, a bunch of people who supported us and mentored us. So Reed worked for us in that way, and the academics was sort of a side hustle.
Sheldon.
I'm going to go in a different direction.
Your name and
Sheldon Hockheiser, class of 73. Reed was the first place I ever felt that I fit in. Went to a nice suburban high school, and I come here, and the first time I'm surrounded by people who are interested in the intellectual life, interested in the kind of serious discussions that Wendy pointed out. So it was like finding a home. And that is one of the things, and then the trick, we were talking about emotional intelligence. I mean, most of my life has been in the corporate world. Well, I always thought I was going to become an academic, but life takes funny bounces. And it's been fine, but yeah, you had to learn a certain amount of emotional intelligence. You had to learn a certain humility of not being able to take public credit because, well, it's the company's. And, well, being in the kind of weird position where I could be the subject matter expert, and there I could talk truth to people and they'd listen to me because I was the subject matter expert on the company's history. And one final thing is, well, Reed shaped me in such a way that I remained single until I hooked up with a fellow Reedy at a reunion. My wife Laura's sitting over there. Yeah. So I'm the poster boy for why you should come to reunion.
Hey, we're here.
All right. Rick.
Richard Cuthbert, class of 73 also, a lot of us here. You know, I had the distinct privilege of somehow getting involved with the Alumni Association, was pretty actively involved for about 10 years, worked with a lot of people here actually during that time. But one of the great pleasures of that was meeting older Reedies, and I'm talking from the 40s, some from the 30s. And there was this common ingredient to all of them. And my wife, who did not go to Reed and had no involvement and was very unlike Reed, saw it more than I did. And she just said, everybody is so interesting. Everyone. You meet a Reedy, they have interesting things to say. They don't really bore you. And I look at it and go, you know, what I learned at Reed more than anything was how to communicate, how to effectively take the amount of time you've got, use it effectively, get your point across, and then stop and listen. And boy, you make people back from all of these classes over this long period of time, and newer people, you know, people who graduate a lot since us, and they all have that ability. Not everybody, of course, but and some are really good. But anyway, I think the conference system here, where they really did make everybody talk, really helped.
Yeah. On a similar note, I'm David Perry again. You can sit down with a Reedy from just about any class, you know, 40 years before you or 40 years after you, and have a great conversation. That's kind of which is one of the reasons I like to come back to reunions, is I meet a lot of interesting people. Yes.
Lowell Whitecamp, class of 1958, currently an emeritus professor at the University of Rochester Medical School. My comment is to the student from the class of 18, the one with the admired curly hair.
That's Noah.
And to bridge 60 years, following up on what you said, and to agree very much with what you said about coming to read and finding a home. By the way, I have just finished the first 20 pages of reading the first 20 pages of today's indictment.
There's someone, yes.
Annette Gardner again, still class of '83. I'm going to push back a bit on the title of this session and the part about the non-read world. And because I think we've also indicated this was a sort of super saturated environment of a lot of the brightest people across all of high schools come together, a very unique situation. But I think that sets up this us-them dynamic that I'm not sure has served us particularly well if we didn't kind of realize that we had to be able to be successful in a world where people are diverse, people are not diverse. But that I kind of learned this the hard way as I got enlightenment when I had to take my son on the college tour about 6 or 7 years ago, and we did Willamette, Reed, Lewis and Clark, and University of Puget Sound, and it's really interesting when you start looking across the liberal arts institutions to see how they all have their structure and what kids go in and go out. My son was never going to thrive here because he's got ADD. He would never focus enough to succeed. He wasn't that kind of student, but he's brilliant. So we had to find a place, and it was really tough. And the point is that I feel like we have to accept the reality is that we got lucky, but a lot of people who are equally and wonderfully bright and quirky have to find their way out in institutions that may or may not know how to work with them, in a diversity of students who may not be as concentrated in wealth like we are, and that's where we have to thrive and know how to navigate and accept that a lot of actual creativity and genius is outside of this institution, and it's our role to cultivate it, and I just want to put that out there about this distinction, because I don't think it's really true. I think it's an interesting mythology we've created, and that Reed has only helped to foster it. That might sound a little provocative. I don't mind doing that, and people can quibble, but I'm just saying the real world is where the action is at, and that's where our children are at, so go with it.
Ed.
Eduardo Ochoa, class of 73, although I came in with a class of 72, I was on the 5-year plan. Yeah, I resonate with your comments very much, because I think Reed, certainly for me as for many others of us, it was an incredibly valuable experience. It was a place where I found people like me that I felt, comfortable with. It was a place that helped develop my analytical and critical thinking skills, but it also, applying that same capacity to be able to reflect back on Reed and that experience allowed me to see its limitations. And one of the things that I think Reed has done throughout its history is it becomes a home for people who don't fit in, who are very smart, but they have a singular focus and a passion. Because we have such a great critical mass of brilliant people, I think that we ought to also help develop their creative thinking as well as their critical thinking, and their ability to work with other people. So a little bit alluding to the diversity you're talking about, and the fact that there's untapped potential for leadership in Reed graduates that we haven't been intentional about as an institution to develop.
In 1 second, but could you guys pass the water around instead of just sitting in front of me?
Sorry.
Yes.
Don't take it personal.
Oh, and some glasses would be
Malon
a
Brasso,
bonus.
class of '85.
Wait, say that again, please.
Malon Brasso, class
Thank
of
you.
'85, and I know you, Sharon, from Zoom. Anyway, sort of to refer to both of your most recent comments, yes, there are lots of smart people elsewhere other than Reed. However, there's something about Reed, I don't know if it's the values, the culture, what it creates, but numerous times, including just last week, I'll be having a conversation with someone, and somehow, where did you go to school comes up. I still live in Portland. Reed, and they're like, oh, that explains it.
Did they ever say what that explains?
Not really. I mean, they'll ask next time.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I put my hand on.
You are?
Right. I am Harry Enriquez, class of 2021.
All right.
Lieutenant. So I want to say, number one, I have ADHD. And the thing for me is, I was perfectly happy at Reed. What I wasn't happy with was leaving Reed. And because it was great for me with having AD, where I'm like, oh, this is an external structure. There are clear expectations, clear things to do. This meets my academic needs. And what was stressful for me is the thing that a lot of people have been saying about not feeling prepared for post-graduation life. And something that I've been internalizing from discussions over Alumni College the past 2 days is that you're right, it's not a question of smarts, it is a question of where do we value the application of the intelligence that makes us work at Reed, or the endurance that makes us thrive at Reed. And I think, I am hearing people talk about intelligence a lot, and I really think focusing on intelligence at all isn't a good, necessarily a useful way to take this track, because, I was pretty dumb in a lot of ways, and Reed made me smarter. I don't think, it's not, but what I'm trying to get to is, Reed also made me value speaking truth to power. It made me value truth and, human decency. And I was complaining to my dad, oh, you shouldn't have sent me to a liberal arts college because it taught me how to value human life, and I can't get ahead in business with that. And so I think that's definitely what I've been hearing and thinking about people talk about throughout this short week is, how do we, you talk about the Cunning Bastard class, of how do we learn how to be cunning without becoming bastards? Thank you.
Way over here.
Yes.
So I am from class of 65, and as my husband John explained.
Could you speak up a little?
As my husband John explained, we met within a few minutes of his arriving on campus, and I knew where his dorm was. So he decided I must be an upperclassman. But I had visited here when I was a junior in high school. And anyway, what we really learned here at Reed, despite the fact that I came here to graduate in biology and go on to become a doctor, because that's what my parents decreed I should do. We have a scroll that goes back 2,000 years, and there is not a doctor in there. There are some Confucian scholars in there that are military men in the very beginning, because they were sent from the part of China that Confucius was in to manage this new place called Korea. But what we learned was how to solve problems. And so we were first, with our agency in management for performing artists, we were the first agency to computerize in the early 1980s. And we were not welcomed well by the other managers. They said, I will never have one of those in my office, nor in this hall. This was in a meeting where the managers were on one side of the table and the buyers, mostly from UC California schools, who started this organization. called the Western Arts Alliance, and that's where we were mentored by other managers on how to do things and how not to charge so little for Elizabeth Cotton, for instance. They told us what a graduate out of Juilliard would be making the first year on the road, and we were charging way too little. So we got all kinds of help, despite the fact that we were the only company that was managing those kinds of artists. It allowed me to build a kiln, you know, that went 2,000 degrees. And I knew how to build a studio and how to prepare, you know, to be able to have the skills, to use the tools to build a studio and to build a kiln that you could climb into, you know, it was big enough. And various points where we changed what we did for a living. And so it allowed us to do some very eclectic things and have a very rich life. So I guess that's the main thing I wanted to say.
Very good. Jim Cahn again.
Yeah, there's a theme here that I'd
State
like.
your name and
Jim Cahn,
class.
class of '64. There's a theme here I'd like to explore. A couple of people have said readies do things because they like to find it interesting, they want to know, and this is somehow distinguished from wanting to do something useful. And the Reed tradition has been, these professors were all going to generate mini-me's. And this was sort of true maybe in the 1930s. Gorham Babson wanted to be a biology major because he wanted to go to medical school. Biology faculty telling, oh, go to Eugene, get your bachelor's there. We're not interested in you unless you want to do theoretical biology. So I went and founded the pediatric department at OHSU. I have seen a shift from the old Reed, which ain't what it's cracked up to be and probably never was, to an emphasis that I see now. And Mary James, those of you who are in Foster Schultz, please come listen to her tomorrow. She's one of the people who is right all on top of this, that the distinction between basic and applied knowledge is false. Because even applied stuff can be pretty goddamn basic. So it boils down to, is it curiosity driven, or do you want to do it for a reason? Do you want to improve the world in some way, and that's why you do it? And John and Irene are telling us exactly that. They saw something where they had a passion, music, and they wanted to improve the way it was, and I happened to have gone to a Olivia Cotton concert in 1965, before you met her, probably, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which was right next door to where she lived. And it was awful the way she was treated. It really was. The only thing that saved her was Pete Seeger was there to protect her.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me that.
I will, yeah. And what I did is I followed the academic track, and I started out being an expert, getting my tenure because I knew everything there was to know about nothing. And then I went into the policy world because that really wasn't what I wanted to do, although I thought I wanted to do it since I was 5. And I decided that I wanted to make a difference in the world, and I got to the stage where instead of knowing everything there was to know about nothing, I knew nothing but about everything. And it was really useful because I can now call myself a generalist instead of a psychologist, and it's a much better fit for me.
Yes.
So just to kind of follow from what you were saying, and also,
Who are you? Name again?
Jonathan Gilbert.
Who are you?
Just have to make sure that. One of the positive things that I found that has come from Reed's emphasis upon evidence-based thinking and critical thinking skills has been many of the best engineers I know are Reedies. We don't have an engineering school here, but it turns out that when you get into the real world and you get into a job where your job is to solve technical problems, that the ability to learn new technical skills and teach them to yourself and not give up at any hurdles, but to continue and pursue the solution to that problem until you actually find it, knowing that it's possible and not giving up is not something that's easily taught, and that I've found that many people do not possess that. So I think that's really a good application, that, you know, people that have that capability or that type of passion for their work do find that it's very, you know, that's one of the things that can really help you in your career. So, yeah.
Yes.
Annette Gardner, 83. So I've had this burning question that I have asked, I think, one past president. I said, do the science majors really get a liberal arts education here at Reed? Because as a biology major trying to go to medical school, which I failed to do, all my classes were in the sciences, and I didn't do all of them particularly well, but I'd also squeezed out all the other classes. I made it through Hume 210. But my point being that I always thought the liberal arts education wasn't just critical thinking, wasn't just solving problems, but it was a worldview, it was an aperture and an understanding at the theoretical level and at the practical level. And that's what a liberal arts education was. So it's a perennial question, like with STEM in the schools, and do the math and the sciences compete with the history and the humanities and the arts? And that's, I think, something that Reed, I'm not sure it's really sort of wrestled with that, but I have wondered about that to this day.
Going to take a break for a minute and just ask a question, which was one of the oral history questions. Since we have the same people in the room talking, there's about a dozen people who are doing all the talking and about, 40 or 50 people who haven't said a word. To think about this, share an unexpected place or event that occurred to you due to your Reed education. So I will call on you, but.
Okay, I graduated from Reed in 1969.
Your name, please, again?
Oh, Didi Unila Taylor.
Thank you.
I graduated in 1969. I had a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship to go to Wisconsin and pursue a PhD in 17th century English literature. And in March of 1969, I'm an orphan. I was orphaned when I came to Reed. And in March 1969, I realized I'm not a teacher. I could never be a teacher. My mother was a fabulous teacher. Two of my sisters are fabulous teachers. I can't teach you how to cross the road, period. So I wisely called my sister and brother-in-law, who were then living in Washington, D.C., and said, I can't take this fellowship. I've got to do something, and I don't have any money. And my beloved brother-in-law, who was a Reedy dropout class of 1952, said, come live with us and get some kind of job and figure out what you're going to do with your life. And so I went to D.C., got a horrible job as a glorified secretary at the National Education Association. But Gary Stoneham of my class, also class of 69, did what he was supposed to do. He went to Johns Hopkins to get a PhD in comparative literature, and he and his girlfriend were living in Baltimore, and he called me and said, a few months into my horrible job, and said, Didi, there's this wonderful newspaper going from Baltimore to Washington, D.C., and they want to hire a librarian. Apply for the job. And I said, I'm not a librarian. And Gary said, Didi, you've been in libraries all your life. Apply for the job. So it was a Chronicle of Higher Education, which at that time was not for profit and had 14 employees. And they were moving to Washington. And the managing editor had the smartest person had never known was Reed College graduate. He hired me. And I retired 32 years later early as a senior editor. So there you go.
Thank you. Yes.
Craig Gunso, class of 63. Responding both to the young woman up on the corner and your question, I was a physics major, and half of my courses were in math and physics, but half of my courses weren't in math and physics. And I survived the year with Marvin Levitch. Do they still require a foreign language here?
Yes.
Foreign language or math, right?
It's foreign language or math.
Yeah.
Foreign language or math?
Yeah.
Okay?
Bluntly put, I came here out of the Air Force. I've been in the service. I was old enough to buy the beer when I came to college, and we did. My first impression of Reed College was all these weird people.
Thank you.
Where you were required to be different, I thought I was different by being normal. That's another vein that I won't get into. Anyway, I did go to graduate school. I went to college for 10 years total. I'm a retired professor in physics from Whitman College in Walla Walla, similar kind of school, at least size-wise. And because I've been with Marvin, I feel that Reed College gave me my education. And I'm an old white guy, and I thought it was all about Western European, basically English. And I didn't read any of that stuff in high school. I read all of it here, but I did know. But in my job at Whitman, as a condition of remaining employed, I founded the Environmental Studies program. And from whole cloth. Now, that's one of the most successful programs we have at the school. I've not been involved in it for 30 years, but I do get to claim Aboriginal status. But I think it was to study everything, bring everything to bear, and listen to people that know more than you do, which they're always willing to come give a lecture, and then you can steal their lecture, and they're happy because they only have to do it once. And you're happy because you get better as it goes. In the initial days, I always felt there was at least one student in the room that knew more than I did, and they didn't hesitate to correct me. But after a while, you get pretty good at it. So, yes, science majors do, I think, get a liberal arts education at Whitman. I don't know about you, pre-med, you guys are...
At Reed or at Whitman?
No, at both.
Okay.
At both. I certainly felt that I got a liberal arts education, and I've not been disabused of that notion yet. But I don't know, pre-meds, I hate to have pre-meds for advisees. Because when you put down what they have to do, there's not a whole lot of room left. I will say that instead of taking optics and thermodynamics in my senior year, I took the second part of humanities. The first part was so much fun, but it ended with Newton. And the second part was revolutions, and that was all right.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jim Orr, class of 65, although I did come back to read from 70 to 72 and studied something else for 2 years. With regard to STEM and how that folds into a sort of Reed-type mindset, I had electrodynamics from Dennis Hoffman. And he started us out with special relativity and the electromotive force laws that occur between charged particles, and from that derived everything that you need for electrodynamics. That shows that if you have those charges and you use special relativity, all of magnetism is explained. And I've never seen that approach used anywhere else. I mentioned it to a physics professor once at the University of Chicago. Well, I suppose it can be done. You know, but it's a marvelous way to teach, and it's perfectly aligned with the sort of mindset that Reed teachers have.
Yes.
Well, speaking to the issue of the liberal arts, you know, we were able to take Lloyd Reynolds' classes, which was really incredible. Ottmar Rudolph, who taught German, was a wonderful mentor for us. And I can go on, but I have to admit that actually I flunked out of Music 110.
You were?
John Ullman, 65.
We got someone over here? Yes.
Yeah, sure. I'm Rowan, class of 2020, and I don't know if I'll just wait for. I guess on the topic of liberal arts, I don't know if anyone relates to this, but when I went into Reed, I was actually expecting it to be more liberal artsy than it was in practice, and it might just be like, a lot of people who are like saying like the math program took a lot of math classes and like kind of did the requirements to do, various things, and it kind of depended on the person, but it's kind of like, but it was interesting because even in a place with like really high ideals, and I did, really feel like I fit in here, the kind of expectations of the world crowded in on those things. Like I remember one, like usually, like pretty much everyone was, accepted and but I remember being in like a kind of math conference once, and they're like, hey, do you want to go to this math talk? And I'm like, no, sorry, I have to go compose an interpretive dance in the canyon. And they looked at me so weirdly. So, yeah, I don't know. And then like maybe another observation that I would be curious to just ask another question about is from what I've heard people say, the younger people seem a little pessimistic than the older people, and I'm wondering how much of that is just the perspective of having lived a more life versus like how the world is different now, and like with technology and other things.
No.
I'd like to piggyback what you were saying, because I had a, sorry, my name is Noah Lerner, class of 2018. I had a similar experience with Reed where it felt like I was a chemistry major, and I felt like I had a lot of major requirements that I had to meet, and a lot of my experience was battling the requirements so that I could actually learn something. And I think the most things that I took away from the school were in things that I didn't get credit for, or things that I didn't seek out in my degree track. I was part of the reactor program, and it was one of the best like applied physics classes I've ever taken, and much more so than my actual physics classes, which I found like I didn't learn as much from. And I found that it was always, it's kind of rambling. I always felt that I had this very like administrative duty as a student to fulfill these requirements as a STEM major, while at the same time wishing that I could seek out more humanities and seek out more arts. And ultimately that's what I did. I left the school and went into the arts entirely. Because I didn't feel like I was being provided the avenues that I thought the school would offer me at first. At the same time, I love Reed, and it's why I come back, and I think that I learned a lot on how to think and how to question, and how to have public and civil discussion, even with people who you don't necessarily agree with. Some of that was modeled by what not to do, and had a very lively Hume 110 conference that we made it to the national news because it was so contentious. And oh yeah, you could Google it. Yeah, the Pontius Avery's conference of 2014.
Oh, Poncho, another survivor. Poncho question.
Yes, yeah, it was. I didn't like that. But I think that I learned a lot from my time here, albeit there was a lot of self-guidance where I would have wished there to be more advising from the faculty.
I know.
Damn, that nothing changed in 40 years is really sad.
Harvey Blau, 63. So I found that I was a little disappointed in hearing that math is no longer a requirement. I found that in my day at Reed, virtually every student had to take this math course in freshman year, and it was an extremely difficult course. The faculty, which had just come into their own after Professor Griffin had retired just a few years before, he was the founder of the math department at Reed and sort of ruled over it for decades. They wanted to put in their abstract, high-level critical thinking course curriculum throughout the curriculum. And many students had a lot of trouble with it, but virtually every student respected it. and virtually every student respected every discipline and every artistic endeavor. Unfortunately, some students didn't respect other people as much as they should. That was one of the negative things I found here. But most people did, and it's something that I only came to value many years after Reed, when I was taking my daughter, we were taking our daughter around to different schools to see where, you know, she might like to go to college. And at 3 different prestigious private liberal arts colleges in the Midwest and East Coast, the student guide of the campus tour made remarks to the effect of, oh, and if you don't like mathematics, don't worry, you don't have to take any courses with those silly equations. And I thought, this is not Reed.
Nope. Okay, we're gonna take like a minute break. We're gonna go around the room and ask everybody to answer this question, 25 words or less, essentially. Looking back, how did Reed influence you? So if everyone who's able could stand up just for a second and give it a little bit of a stretch.
This is great.
Wait.
Can we get some glasses and water passed down?
Yeah, can we get the water?
Could the water and the glasses get passed? We've already asked that once. There's no glasses left.
They never got there.
Pass the glasses. Send the glasses. And the water. John? All right. While we're standing, anybody who did not sign the waiver? You were here early. Why didn't you?
I wasn't.
Please, we want everybody to please sign the waiver. Plenty of time. Okay, let's sit down and 25 words or less.
Repeat the question.
Okay. For those of you who weren't paying attention the first time. Looking back, how did Reed most influence you? We'll start with me and then we'll go left around the room. So I'm David Perry, 73. I think being a psych major here made me look for cause and effect in just about everything.
Richard Cuthbert, class of 73, anthropology major, survived Gail Kelly. I guess what I was going to say is just real open thinking, looking at things with curiosity. A lot of things people have said.
John Ulrich, 73. And go back to the theme of fitting in. I didn't fit in before I came to Reed. I didn't fit in while I was at Reed. By the time I was out of Reed, I concluded that I didn't have to fit in.
Lowell White Camp, class of 58. Critical thinking for Marsh Cronin and Marvin Lettich.
I'm Sally Whitecamp, and I am a Reedy spouse, and I would not have made it here.
Okay, I'll step in. Laura Webb, Daniel, class of 1977. There are many ways Reed influenced me, but one particular that has benefited me greatly, and that was, although I was a medieval French history literature person here at Reed, my thesis was on a 13th century poetess, and I'm now a lawyer. The explication de texte, looking, seeing, understanding is what I do. I'm an appellate lawyer, and I do explication de texte, and I thank Reed for that.
Steve Burks, class of 73, although I entered with 72.
Reed was extremely difficult for me intellectually, although some parts were very exciting because I found out last year I have ADD and have had all my life. But it was extremely tough. And I grew more culturally and socially than I did directly intellectually, but it did prepare me for the intellectual awakening I had when I went to grad school.
Well, I think perhaps the way that Reed impacted me the most academically, if I'd have to think more for overall, would be having context for my ideas. I was a very excited teenager with lots of creative philosophical ideas, and then when I went to Reed, I realized, there were some people who thought that 2,000 years ago. And in every discipline, because, there's some abstract things that just kind of cover everything, so I got a real appreciation for the context and interweavings of thought over time, and more, organized in my argumentation.
And you are again?
Rowan.
I'm Catherine Sackinger, class of 2013 in chemistry, and I would say that one of the biggest ways that Reed influenced me was just by all of the people I met. And kind of opening doors into where there's intellectual and academic things to do in the rest of the world. I grew up in Portland, and my family was pretty low income, so as you can imagine, being able to meet people here, and for example, I live in Connecticut now, which is somewhere I probably never would have gone if not for the specific person that I met here. And I think that there are a lot of connections like that that show me that there are these tendrils going out everywhere. It's not just here where I've always been prior to 5 years ago that I appreciate.
Annette Gardner, class of '83. Confidence, it gave me confidence. So I struck it on my own path after graduating. I did Peace Corps, I bounced around, and I finally came back into academia, and I've been a successful and now retired academic, and I have to thank Reed for all that sort of boost to boldly go where I wanted to go.
I'm Paul Stern, class of '73. Reed influenced me in the array of friendships I formed at Reed, that some of which have been lifelong. It inspired a love of learning, a sense of intellectual adventure, and it was just, I loved the Northwest, and I remember Reed influenced me by giving me access to the Columbia River Gorge, where I had a fantastic time hiking in the woods and experiencing all those things that people experienced in the late 60s, early 70s. You can imagine what that was.
Okay. Hi, my name is Julia. I'm class of...
Julia what, please?
Julia Green. Class
Thank you.
of 2017, 2018. I get categorized in different class years depending on who I talk to. Oh my God. Sorry, that chair was breaking for a second. I would read that being able to organize your thinking is really important, to be able to communicate with other people. And I am a little bit ADHD, I don't like saying ADHD, but I'm sometimes very scattered in my thinking. I have a lot of ideas all the time. And being able to explain things in a way that makes sense to people, and knowing that there are different communication styles. So being able to communicate well with people from many different backgrounds and many different contexts, I think is really important, and those communication skills are something that I honed while I was here.
Jim?
I'm Jim Orr, class of '65. In class, I would, especially at the beginning, tell jokes. They were always taken seriously. That embarrassed me, and eventually I started putting a lot more serious thought into my utterances. And that's
May Love Wrestling, class of '85, though I started in '84. I would say the influence of Reed contributed to my willingness to question everything, to hold my own opinions no matter what other people's are saying, unless they've got good evidence or a valid argument, and then I'm willing to change them.
I'm Jane Neff Rollins, would-be class of 73, although I didn't graduate. When I got here at age 17, I was a painfully shy child, basically. And I was not able to take advantage of what Reed had to offer as far as academics are concerned. But I made some of my best and longest term friends while here. So that is the major influence that Reed has had on me.
Behind you?
I'm Cami Shu, class of 2018. I studied math and economics, but I paint now, and sometimes my paintings go up in galleries. So I'd say that Reed has influenced me by giving me the boldness and confidence to follow my curiosity, even if it means taking a completely different path than what I imagined.
Nice.
Catherine Dining, I would have been class of 1985, I didn't graduate. And I would have to say that partly because of the short time that I was here and not graduating, not writing a thesis, the most valuable thing that I got out of Reed, I'm gonna hark back to the theme of this discussion, Reed values in a non-Reed world. You know, I was ejected before I was ready, you know, to go deal with that real world, that non-Reed world. So the relationships that I formed here, the community that I took with me when I moved back to the Bay Area, has had a profound influence on my life. Just having this group of people who I can talk to about Reed things, you know, Reed type things. And I found some other people out in the world who didn't go to Reed who have that same mindset, but not very many, you know, honestly. And 40 years later, I still have a fondness for people who went to Reed. You know, it's like we recognize each other. And, it's nice to know that I have that support, even if it's kind of nebulous sometimes.
Okay.
Elizabeth Fisher, class of 1967. I went to law school 25 years after I graduated from Reed, and that's when I really appreciated having gone to Reed. Think of problems differently, and you just don't follow the, you know, step, this step, this step. You say, well, gee, there's other stuff. It's, you know, more exciting.
Thank you.
Megan Pritchard, used to be Megan McClintock Gilbert, class of 06. The most superficial thing that Reed gave me was a love of the sun. I grew up in Southern California and I hated the sun. I hated it. I was always freezing. There was air conditioning everywhere. And I came here and I got to appreciate the couple sunny days. But more seriously, is that I got to work with my professor on a sabbatical year of hers. That also happened to be my thesis year. So I got to take my thesis and an independent study and go into schools. It was psychology and run a research program with her. And like 8 or 10 years later, they helped edit my thesis and ended up getting published. And I loved that experience. Unfortunately, life has led me down a lot of different paths, and it kind of feels like my life is on hold. It's not really, but and I'm curious what would have happened if I'd been able to explore those things, or when I returned to them, because I really did love that experience, and that's the most I got out of Reed.
Okay. You.
Barbara West. I entered in the class of 60, and the first year I came from a small rural high school in New York State. And so one of the ideas that I had firmly was that if anybody was sent to a boarding school, it was because they were a juvenile delinquent. Period. Got to read, discovered that wasn't true. I took 4 classes my first year, which I found out was unusual. I was used to being the smartest kid around, but I discovered that I wasn't. And I married a fellow student who was a psychopath. He wanted me to kill people. I was a chemistry major, and he was convinced that in the chemistry lab I could find both syringes and CN. Cyanide, yeah. Just sitting around, and I could pick them up, and he would instruct me what grocery store to go into. And I was to inoculate the sugar bags to prove that it was possible to kill people and not get caught if you didn't have a reason to kill them.
Okay. Laura.
That's not very valuable.
Laura Leviton. Laura, wake up.
Oh, I was just so in awe of that last story.
What happened? We have.
Come on, what?
What's the end of the story? Well, he finally, he was sufficiently conventional enough that he didn't want to marry somebody different without getting divorced from me. So that enabled me to get a divorce. And I returned to Reed in '62. I graduated in '64. Not in chemistry. But in experimental psychology.
Laura.
Okay, after a really unfortunate marriage and teaching and doing research at a place that I found to be really intellectually dishonest. I was sitting at our 25th reunion of class of '73 in a coffee house with 3 other Reedies and realized that real intellectuals are as rare as hen's teeth, and you better just treasure them. And the result is that I married Sheldon down the way, and I feel like I have come home, and I feel like I come home every time I am here. So when I say I love one of you for what you say, I mean it to the bottom of my heart.
I'm Steve Richards, 73, history. I like a lot of you, and I think what I've benefited most is critical thinking, hard work, strategic thinking. And if I had to point to one person who aided in that, it would have been John Tomsich.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Next to you. Hello.
Irene.
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 No, I'm not sure what to say, because I kind of answered this question several times.
Well, we can go on to someone else if you want.
Well, why don't you come back to me later?
We'll try. We're running out of time. We really do need to shorten the answers.
Susanna Langren, class of '73, art history. When I got here, art history, music, 3 choirs with Jenny, Robert Palladino in calligraphy, part of my whole career, my whole life. Critical thinking, and you weren't weird if you had ideas. You were just a normal person if you had ideas. And the only place I've ever encountered you could stay in the library all night.
Mark McLean, class of '70. I think got 2 things from Reed. One, after being on campus for about a day and a half, I realized that I have finally found my people, and it has remained that way to this day. The other thing I learned was the ability to think in terms of frameworks, especially various frameworks, and how ideas are pretty much formed by the frameworks they came from and what happens when you shift context. And I've been using that in one form or another ever since. And also I got an appreciation for the value of sometimes deep weirdness. It is useful.
Karen Greenbaum, Maya, class of '73. two things. One, I'm not necessarily the smartest person in the room. That was a really good thing to learn. And the second is, after writing the thesis, never again writer's block.
Well, the main thing I learned at Reed is that I can keep on learning, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Sharon started out as Chapin, became Cercello, and now I'm Toji. So, but I already said a lot of this, but I think number one, I would have to say the fact that I met my first husband, Guy Cercello, on the first day of freshman orientation, and we had 4 children. We acquired 4 more during the course of our first part of our life together. And that obviously is one of the greatest things, I think, that happened to me because of Reed, because I wouldn't have met Guy. Secondly, after Guy was teaching here, and I had developed quite a career here connected both to Reed and the city, and I frankly wanted to become mayor of Portland, and I was on my way. I'd been chosen the youngest influential woman of Portland, or some strange title. He decided he wanted to leave and go to UC Irvine and be at the beginning of a new university. So I was forced to leave where I really wanted to be and go to a little spot of 250 planned houses in the middle of nowhere. So I said, okay, well, I'll just organize this. And through that came all kinds of other careers, leading to then meeting my current husband, which led me to this very strange career, I guess for most people, of being, people say, well, you're sort of the greatest expert on Braille and raised letter signs in the United States. Why, and because at Reed, on that very first assignment to write a paper on, I think, the 23rd chapter of the Odyssey, and I said, what do I do about this? And I had to go into every little detail of that chapter and read it so carefully in order to write what was a good enough paper for me. And that enables me to become an expert. And I say, well, I'm an expert in it because nobody else wants to be. But it takes this tremendous amount of inspection and detail. And I learned that starting at Reed.
Next.
Okay, John Ullman, 65. So I suppose what none of us learned at Reed was how to be succinct, but I'll try.
Please try. Remember the question. Okay. How did Reed most influence you?
Go there.
So I think the Reed values, that Reed didn't value making a lot of money highly. I think Reed certainly valued people taking care of themselves, is my feeling. And so that informed what we did. We called our business Traditional Arts Services, not John and Irene Produce or Presents or something. And we thought that we were providing services, which I think we did. And then, as I've said, the whole group of people we met, Reedies that went here before us, like Phil and Vivian Williams, on to the younger people that were here after us, were just incredibly supportive of us, and not just patting us on the head, but Steve McCarthy found me a job at Osberg, for example, when I was transitioning from science into the arts, and things like that that were really major.
Thank you.
My name is Warren Zwick. I was class of '88. I would just echo some things that have already been said. Reed affected me in 2 ways. One was the personal relationships, and then the other side was the intellectual aspect. I had a wonderful first year, really enjoyed myself. The second year I transferred to Columbia, and I had a really not very good experience there. Like, the students only seemed to be concerned with the grades, and there wasn't very much intellectual curiosity. So I transferred back to Reed, and I'm glad I did. And the other thing is just that Reed left me, just through the sheer volume of so much reading and writing and oral arguments. Just the ability to feel, when I left here, I felt like I could pretty much teach myself most things if I just had the energy and the time. And in fact, lately, I've gone on a philosophy kick. I just recently read Plato's Republic again, and I enjoyed it more this time than.
Very nice. Jim?
Read actually changed my life twice, many, many years apart. And I can only understand it in terms of language that didn't exist when I first came to Reed. When I first arrived at Reed, I was a STEM person. And it didn't feel right. And now I realize what the problem was. I'm not a STEM person, and neither is anybody else here. You're all STEAM people.
STEAM, yes.
Yes, and so I'm tired of hearing about STEM. If you have to know what STEAM is, that A in the middle is the arts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I was, what did I do here? But if anybody remembers me from my time here, I was a dancer. Even though I was a psychologist, I was going to become a theoretical psychologist and all that other kind of stuff. And then, but I became a STEAM person, and psychology wasn't sufficient. I was teaching at a faculty, and I had 13 publications in 13 different journals, and the other faculty were saying, "Is he a psychologist?" And I was saying, "What's the problem?" Eventually, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do, and I became a policy analyst, and I became somebody who was a lover and a creator of various kinds of forms of music. Flash forward to 2004, my 40th reunion. I was coming here. I got involved in something that the class of '54 was doing on Gilbert and Sullivan, and I recruited some people, and I wrote some lyrics to I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General. And because of that, I was invited to come back in 2005 and be the commencement speaker. And while I was here the first time, I married this wonderful woman named Kathia, and it didn't last for about 2.5 years. But when I was coming back here again, I recontacted Kathia, and we are now married for the second time, and we've been going for the last 17 years, and this time it's for real. So that's what Reed did to me.
I'm Doug Burbank, class of '73, graduated in '72, which tells you a little bit. I was arrived here with a girlfriend who'd already graduated from college, so she wanted me to go through quickly. And I think I learned a lot of creativity, initiative, and some degree of self-confidence that allowed me to go from being a literature major and an outward bound instructor and to explore my love of the mountains by becoming a geologist that allowed me to travel the world and many of the most exciting mountain ranges around the world.
Sheldon.
Well, it's hard to give a short.
You are?
I'm Sheldon Hockheiser, class of '73. It's hard to give a single or simple answer, so let me.
Well, then we'll pass on you.
No. So I will just tell you one tale.
Okay.
I came here as a chemistry major. Also, I had a love of history, which take a bunch of history courses. Made it through organic just fine. Got to physical chemistry and discovered that it's all this weird math, and once a month there was something that reminded me that it was chemistry. So I walked into my advisor, Marshall Cronin's office, and said, I don't want to be a chemist, I'm going to become a historian. I'll switch to history at major. And Marshall looked at me and said, "You ever hear of the history of science? You might be able to put your technical training to good use." I had never heard of history of science. I looked into it. I decided it was interesting. I set up an ad hoc interdisciplinary major in chemistry and history and went on to get a PhD in it, and that's been my profession ever since. So it was a very wise piece of advice by, well, I've heard other people talk about Marsh. It was marvelous. We stayed in touch till the day he died. About having the sense to know a student, figure out something that, I'd never heard of this discipline, and it's been my career.
Okay.
Jonathan Gilbert, class of 2003, ancient Greek. I feel like basketball would be the one thing that, I mean,
I second that too.
you know, I probably would have never taken up playing basketball anywhere else because I would have not been able to compete with anyone. But no, in all seriousness, I think that the sports program at Reed was also very underrated, under-discussed.
We were a 2-pack a day team.
And as well, I don't think I would be teaching myself group theory from a library book on the side, or investigating unsolved math problems, or being a software engineer as a liberal arts major had I gone somewhere else. So I feel like the broadness of education that Reed offered and the overall intensity of it certainly had a very lasting impact. And plus everything else everyone said.
I'm Brian McGreen, an anthropology major in '91, also survived Gail Kelly. But I think she was also on the foundation of a lot of stuff that was around me that was functioning well. So I do remember Ed Giroux, who had joined the year I took his first class. He was teaching Indian philosophy. And I managed to read the Vedas and all this stuff, and got this, like, you know, almost just shocked again that 2,000 years ago the same you know, psychedelic streams of consciousness were getting written on paper as they were, you know, in the 20th century. And I remember writing out my paper for him and him commenting back, "That's great, I understand what you mean, can you say it in English?" And so I think it would be really good, like a Reed value non-Reed world, you know. You got a good idea, now can you make it work in a world everybody else lives in too. A similar one on Reed's pragmatism. I had this young professor with back was here, he's very, very strong, wonderful Phobian. He's now at Rice. But I asked him, I told him this is, you know, I want to actually do something that's going to work, I want to switch to economics. He said, why are you going to do that? We do economics, we do it better. So it was kind of scary, but that message basically kept working for me.
Okay. I'm Lisa Serban, I'm class of '68, psychology major, and I really don't want to repeat things other people have said because they're all resonating, or most of them are. But I will say that my Reed made me realize that I could be comfortable within academia and an academic setting. Without having to censor what I was thinking or saying, that was a big difference from high school. Where the teachers were all looking over their shoulders because the witch hunt and all of that had been not too far earlier when I was in high school. They were very careful, you know, you couldn't belong to student sane and you couldn't march for, you know, civil rights and that sort of. So it was really nice to be at Reed and be able to do those things and feel I had support. I had people who were quiet about it. And I was very comfortable in an academic setting. I went through a straight academic career, and I went to graduate school, which I think 76% of my class did. They didn't all finish, but I did. And I just went straight through and took an academic job, and I'm still doing it, though I'm well past the official retirement age. They can't force me to retire. I like to teach and research, so I'm doing it, and it's just been my identity, I guess. I realized I've been in school since I was 3 years old, and never left.
Okay, Marcia?
Yeah, so Marcia Yarros, class of '73. Briefly, one thing that I took away from Reed was I learned to study here. All through high school, things came easily to me. And unlike Sheldon, when I hit organic chemistry, not only did I not understand it, but I realized I didn't know how to study. And so I learned how to work my way through something that was difficult. And so that was a very valuable thing.
You. Yes.
Okay.
With the mask.
David Douglas, class of 2018, philosophy. Being at Reed challenged my perception of myself and who I thought I was, because being in an environment where the people around you are supposed to be similar to you really highlights the significant differences.
Thanks. Ed?
Eduardo Ochoa, class of '73. I think probably the single greatest gift was capacity for intellectual fearlessness. To be and to apply that to your own assumptions. Constantly challenge your assumptions, question assumptions, and not be afraid of what it might how it might impact your life if you suddenly start questioning something. It allows you to keep growing. So that's what I got here. I came with a love of learning already, but I didn't have that. I was more, more solicitous of received learning prior to reading.
Thank you. Yes.
Jose Guillen, class of '03 psychology. I learned how to be comfortable in being uncomfortable, and like expanding. No, seriously, like in expanding my perspective. Like having had such a limited experience where I grew up, everything here was different. Everyone was very different, and at first, it caused me to sort of crunch in, and then I realized that I was only hurting myself. So then, taking every class, African dance, yes, fencing, yes, like physics, yes, like all this stuff, just, and then not being good at it and being okay with that. So like becoming comfortable with being comfortable. I think it's one of the best things I got from reading.
Next, with the math.
Kellen Stanley, 0607. I really came out of Reed wanting to terraform the world with Reed ideals. And having had the experience of Reed made me feel justified in arguing for positions as long as they met the criteria of humanism and good intellectual rigor and good work for whatever problem you were working on. Interestingly, also made me come back to Reed and argue to restore some principles that kind of got lost here under Kroger and some of the more recent things, which might also be a panel that we talking about at some point.
Sure. Holly?
Holly Byers Ochoa, class of '73. Come from a rather traditional family, so here I learned how to question authority. And I learned how to research and read like crazy and put my arguments together.
Craig Gunslow, class of '63. I think I learned here to try to get at the values that are informing the way you're arguing or discussing. I find my students always are brought up short when I say, tell me what you're in favor of. And we're pretty good at analyzing, especially academics. That's kind of what we do. But we don't affirm very often. I learned that here. And another thing I learned here is that this school is full of Jews. And I grew up in rural Washington State, and I didn't know any Jews till I came here. And I wondered where you've been my whole life. Because I like to argue too.
Yes, there's a lot of overlapping cultures.
Yes.
I'm Liz Blau. I'm with Harvey. I was happy to meet him at a folkmusic party in New Haven many years ago, and that's it.
Okay, Harvey?
Yeah, Harvey Blau, class of '63. I came here as a barely 17, rather immature, prospective lit major for not very well thought out reasons. Taking Math 11 and putting in many hours every week over the course of that year, and with the clarity and extreme generosity of time of my math professor, John Ledley, my views on conceptual mathematics turned from it's impossible to it's accessible to it's wonderful. And I became a math major and never looked back. Incidentally, those qualities of of clarity and being extremely generous are principles I tried to apply in 56 years of being a math professor. Because I think that it's 98% nurture and 2% nature when it comes to and the other thing that I got from Reed was a deep appreciation of music, from classical music, thanks to my piano teacher Fred Rothschild, to Appalachian string band music, thanks to associating with other students, including John and Irene Ullman over there. And again, I learned that if you are open-minded and work hard at something, you can really make it something good. A principle I've applied in 37 years of founding, directing, arranging for a choir, a Jewish music choir at our humble little synagogue in Illinois. CDs are available on request.
Okay.
So that's it.
In Pat Music class of 73, I also came as a 17-year-old, and so on a superficial level, calligraphy, which led to other things in my later career and other media and so forth. But also calligraphy was, as taught here, as many of you know, it in some ways could be considered a microcosm of the Reed experience, because it was doing, but it was also analyzing, and it was also seeing how things are connected to other things, connected to history, connected to thought and philosophy and so forth. So that, and what I took from that and Reed in general, I would say was, well, one thing is an appreciation of eclecticism and weird senses of humor, along with intellectualism, ability to formulate and identify problems, and flexibility, so that when I found myself in unusual circumstances, I said, okay, I can figure this out.
Noah?
It's hard to tell because, like, to self-analyze and just like, oh, like there's so many other contextual things that come into play than just my college. I think that if I were to name like one thing though about Reed that influenced me greatly is the ability to, like I was touching on earlier, to hold discussions and to be sociable, I guess. I think it just informed my social abilities greatly.
Thank you.
Harriet Enriquez, 21, studio art major, and the biggest thing Reed did for me was it helped me learn that I like other people.
Cool.
Thank you.
Next to Harriet.
Larry Sides, class of 73. I came thinking I was a STEM person, discovered I was a STEAM person. I loved the Hume classes. Being in my sophomore year, most of my friends had dropped out and I got depressed and I didn't have a focus, so I've spent the rest of my years in unstructured, independent study, trying to catch up on all the stuff that I missed.
Yeah. David, we'll finish the back row with you.
David Adler, class of 63, and as the father of two kids who have graduated from Oberlin and Carleton, I would just say there are other schools that can produce smart people. But you know, for me, and I love what you said about basketball, because when I was a freshman, Dan Greenberg and I went to shoot baskets, and they were auditioning in Botsford. They were auditioning for Romeo and Juliet. We said, well, we can't play basketball, so let's audition. And both of us got cast. I love doing theater here. I don't know how it's different now that it's gotten more professional. But, you know, there couldn't have been a studio art major, I don't think, when I was here. So to me, the non-STEM, the Lloyd Reynolds and the art history and the calligraphy class and what was done outside my particular, I was a physics major, but everything else, the STEAM part, as you said, made a huge impression on me and has continued. Has been very, very important in my life.
Thank you.
I'm Sandra Purnell. I am not a Reedy. I'm here with Stephen Adams, who is. And I love Reed because I've learned about Reed by learning how he thinks. And it's really been fantastic.
I'm Stephen Adams, class of 61, history. And Reed didn't really change me because I grew up in a disputative, eclectic, wide-thinking family that explored everything from soup to nuts all the time. That's what I grew up with around the table. And so at Reed, I simply found that I was in a comfortable group of people that were in many many ways like me. They certainly were like my parent. They were like the wonderful friends that had gathered around our dinner table for all my life. And so it was very much a welcoming and homecoming experience. And therefore, there wasn't really anything that I took away from Reed that wasn't already deeply in me. If I had to sum it up with a phrase that has always resonated with me, it is not just question authority, but even more specifically, I'm not satisfied with secondary sources. They have never been enough. If I go all the way back to the primary sources and then even more primitive than that, I finally can feel a comfort zone that allows me to express myself in a deep way that resonates on those primary sources. And I have used that after Reed in very successful careers, a couple of them, because I'm always looking to the fundamental source of what I need to know in order to impart to others. I've always been extremely comfortable here, not because there was any great transformation, but because there was an affirmation of something already deeply inside me, and I'll never leave that behind. And fortunately, after 50 years, I met my Reed soulmate, Wayne State 65, who would have been a Reedie if Reed had known anything about the Midwest or the East. I was from California, where 40% of the student body were from in the 60s. Completely oriented around the West. Portland and California, that was all that we knew here at Reed. Thank you.
New York.
So it's been a huge benefit to see the expansion throughout the country.
I'm Catherine Mocanon, class of 73. I entered with what became the class of 72, had a very tough first year, as many did. Left at the end of the first year, tried a quarter at Berkeley, fabulous school, but I could see the contrast with Reed. It took me the rest of the year not going to school, working as a waitress, a department store salesperson, the real world, and to really appreciate what Reed was. I came back, I was a little bit more mature, I was ready to really benefit from what Reed had to offer. I was thinking the primary sources was one of the things. It's okay to struggle with the text. And I was able, the love of learning and really getting to the bottom of something, I was able to bring into the rest of my life. And it took me a lot of years to really understand that.
Thank you.
Theano Peterson, I was Theano Moratides, 1973, psychology. I came as a transfer student from Miami, Florida. I was not happy here at all the whole time. I didn't appreciate anything about Reed. I came as a religion major, took a leave, decided I was more interested in human psychology. There was only one human psychologist in the department. She didn't like me. So I became an animal torturer and continued to do that throughout grad school. Got a PhD in experimental psychology and then left academia. You know, I'm just not a quitter, but it's perseverant. It's this perseverative thing. And then worked as a typesetter for 20 years, very, very happily, and then, you know, segued into engineering. And now looking back, though, I appreciate what was here, but it took me that long. And
What is it, though?
so from Reed, now I look back and remember very fondly Alan Nuringer. Tactics and instrumentation, putting together the relay racks and then the solid state racks after we got transistors, and you know, well, guess what? That was computer programming. I didn't know that. I thought computer programming was the key punch. Anyway, and the calligraphy, which I from Palladino, those two things. I was a typesetter for 20 years after that. Anyway, those are the things. Now I can see how it all came together and led to that. But it was a tough place to be.
Yep.
And Wendy Robinson, class of 73.
Bring us home.
I think what I took away from Reed was the fact that I have always wanted to continue to learn.
all through my life. I have continued to learn, and I have stretched myself, started taking a language, when I was 50 to learn that one, and that persistence and hard work that I got learned here is what carried me on. What does carry me on, not past tense.
All right, I'm David Perry, class of 73. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the discussion today, for your contributions. I'd like to thank you for coming to reunions, and thank you for supporting Reed College.
And one last word. We should all thank Dave Perry because this session was his idea.
Yay.